I think one of the striking things about thinking about a post-COVID future is how would I put it? For me, I've been thinking about how communities control their existence as much as they can all my life, and so that's rocked me up towards, say, anti-nuclear stuff to begin with, and then thinking about Scottish independence, and then thinking about technology, and then latterly realizing that we're in a kind of an ecological crisis, and the question of how you control your existence, how a community controls its existence, and it keeps existing. The stakes become ever higher, and along comes COVID-19, and does something that if you were in the position that I've been in over the last couple of years, which is basically sort of independence supporting green lefty or left greenie, it does what even all the climate marchers and the kid protesters and Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion weren't able to do, really, which was to bring the environmental crisis, to make it visceral, literally to bring it to the surface of our skin, to the insides of our bodies, because there's no doubt that COVID is the consequence of what you could call a disrupted and disruptive biosphere. You know, the way that the bug was released as a consequence of agribusiness and the way that we consume food is all connected. So suddenly, you know, we've often talked about our environmental or our planetary responsibilities, but now we really are on the planet, and the planet is really getting to us, and it gets to us at the level of how we move about the world, how our granny is, how the shops in our neighbourhood survive, how care is practiced. So it's ambivalent when I'm thinking about COVID-19 myself. It's an ambivalence. My mum was a barrier nurse, and she knows so our household knew all about the measures that you need to take to stop something contagiously jumping from one person to another. So it's a public health crisis, and it has to be battled in as effective a way as possible. But I can't also help the thinking that it's an opportunity for us to think about the kind of system shift that we know we need to make, but we find it psychologically difficult to do. You know, the kind of scare scenarios that the green movement has been sort of raising. You know, imagine if your food supply changed, or imagine if you had to live in boiling summer temperatures. Imagine what that would do to your everyday life. Imagine how strangely that would make you feel, how odd it would be. We've had to sort of either evoke that or observe that happening in a flood in a Yorkshire village, or observe that happening in a Bangladeshi agricultural sector far off down a screen. Well, now it's come to our doors. We can go up and down a high street, and I'm sure you have this experience. I'm having this experience at the moment, looking at sort of beloved establishments that are no longer there and don't look like they're coming back. And that's because COVID has shut down the system. It's stopped the consumerist society, or put a big wrench in it. And that was part of what, you know, lefty Greens were trying to convey to people, is that how can we get it to you that your business as usual, and that business is consumption as well as production, will have to radically change if we are to reduce the material throughput, as the ecological scientists put it, of a society. If we are literally have to reduce the amount of stuff that we chew through and generate in a way that we couldn't have conceived of until now. And the COVID moment, that's the great promise of the COVID moment, is that we've had this kind of warning shot from Gaia. And the warning shot says, I'm going to help you experience what it's like to live a post-consumerist, post-capitalist, whatever the post you want it to be, society. And are you going to respond guided by the better angels of your nature rather than the worst? And I think, generally speaking, in terms of the mutual aid, in terms of the priority for carers that's suddenly come up the agenda, I think we have responded mostly with the better angels of our nature, and observing that amongst ourselves, what next steps do we take and how do we take them? So that's the question, you know, and I think everybody will probably have their own political solutions to that, but that seems to be the challenge. What is the next system that we can discern or that we've been giving ourselves the time to discern, and we've had this sort of experiential shock that means we need to discern it. What's the next system going to be? In recent months and years, partly because I'm splitting, my time between Scotland and England and Glasgow and London, the crises of politics in the rest of the UK and Scotland, maybe even Wales separately as well, Northern Ireland also another factor. There are different crises of politics and power in each of these domains. And certainly, if you compare, certainly my sense is that the agenda in the rest of the UK is about a kind of localisation, because there are so many communities who just look to the central government and see that it's not going to serve them as a locality. And the question is, in the UK and England, what do those localities do if they don't have, say, the range of land laws or right to buy or right to this laws that they have in, say, Scotland? What do you do? So, so I've been interested in things like flat pack democracy in Frome and Somerset. There are lots of experimentations going on in small localities in, say, the southwest, places like Devon and Somerset, which are kind of, how would you put it, sort of soft anarchist. Transition towns, which you may have heard of, has come out of that area as well. And there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to sort of revive a sense of citizenship by practical hands-on doing, making and building. I mean, not just of stuff, but of organizations and institutions. That fits into the COVID moment, because we've got to think about the length of our supply chains. And if we're going to localize our supply chains, then we have to find a way to practically do it. And a lot of the experiments that are happening in municipalism and localisation in the UK, I mean, things like the Preston model that you may have heard of, Frome, Flatback and from Somerset and Frome. A lot of it won't be unfamiliar to Scottish activists, say Scottish land activists over the last 10, 20, 30 years. So we're ahead in that respect. If one of the answers to the crisis of COVID-19 is a kind of viable relocalisation of our economies and societies, then, as is often the case in Scotland, we're well set up for that. And we even have, however faulty it is, but we do have a transmission mechanism between people who are interested in land and community rights and national legislation. That mechanism doesn't exist in many other parts of the country. I just did a presentation to Northern Ireland Development Trusts organisation, and they are just throwing up their hands at how far behind they are, even to get to the basics of a right to buy or a community's right to have a perspective on the assets and territories around about it. So I'm interested at Commonweal, as you may or may not know. I'm part of the board of Commonweal, have been from the start, and they've just brought out a big vision called resilience economics. And I think what they're trying to do with that is to stick the word resilience, which, it can mean riding the punches. It can also mean being strong in the face of challenges. And they're trying to tie that to an economic plan for Scotland going forward. And it's very much based on supporting small businesses, getting them into mutually supporting networks, thinking about the assets of the country as something that benefits the residents of the country, rather than as always oriented towards a kind of globalized export market model. So that's all fine. Is that 2 minutes? Yeah?
That's a couple of minutes, yeah.
Okay. So that's all fine at the level that we often, that many people talk about policy in Scotland. It's very natural post the independence referendum and post the whole constitutional culture for people to go about in the street and say, well, what about the Barnett formula? What about the constitutional or infrastructural consequences of that? And maybe the interest in things like shorter working week or universal basic income in Scotland is a testament to our capacity to think about big policy pictures. But I think the post-COVID future is, in Scotland as anywhere else, should be about experiments in living, because if we don't make post-consumerism attractive, if it doesn't feel like an attractive experience to have a completely different relationship to our ecological impact upon the planet at the level of our daily experience, at the level of the way that we work, shop, play, associate, have fun, build things together. If we don't feel that to be different and also feel that to be better and more valuable in some way, then I think there's going to be a lot of emotional resistance to the call that COVID-19 is a sort of wake up to a post-growth, never mind a degrowth, call it a post-growth society. So I think the best way to address that is to try out, is in a sense a Comrie conversation or a local conversation. There's one way to kick that off. But I'm really interested at that conversation, then looking around about it in the real world and saying, what are the assets, whether those are physical, building assets, human assets, environmental, cultural, whatever, food, what are the assets that our conversation can then grab onto and genuinely bring a more sustainable future from the future to the present in the way that we live now. And as I say, I think with the kind of cultural and political and historical force of land politics in Scotland, again, we're the luckiest country in the world because we have so many natural, innate historical resources to help us take ourselves forward into that future. So I hope that that's the outcome of COVID. It's been a strange time, but that estrangement will hopefully start a completely different story about how we shape our lives at the macro and at the micro level.